Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the Fantasy Football Week 6 wide receiver start or sits. I'm going to be going over my 4 starts and my 4 sits at the wide receiver position for Week 6 of the Fantasy Football season. I'm also going to be going over my 1 through 36 wide receiver rankings as I try to attempt to get the most balanced and accurate rankings that I could possibly come up with. Yes, I'm going to be wrong in many occasions, but in my opinion, I think this is how Week 6 is going to turn out. And before we get into that, I just want to thank all of you who have subscribed to my YouTube channel. For those of you who continue to support, I appreciate it. And if you would like to, and you haven't already, that subscription button, it's down there. It's looking spicy. It wants to be clicked. All right? It's asking for it. I'm advocating for it. Do it the favor, click that little button. You'll get more of my content in your subscription box going forward. Now, let's get right into it, shall we? Hey everybody, how's it going? We're in week 6 and we're talking wide receivers, and these two are back again. For the second week in a row, we have Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods as a tandem at the wide receiver start position. I mean, it's undeniable. These two are absolutely incredible. And Cooper Kupp especially, thus far this season, being the number 2 wide receiver in half-point PPR scoring, just behind Adam Thielen. I mean, Cooper Kupp's been an animal. I think this week he's most likely going to play, even though he sustained a concussion in this past week's game against the Seattle Seahawks, comparatively to his counterpart or his cohort, good old Brandon Cooks. I think Brandon Cooks, because of his history of concussions, is more likely to not play. And I think Cooper Kupp, if and when he does play, is always a fantasy threat, being Jared Goff's best friend in this offense, a guy who's just been eating up targets and receptions week after week. And not to mention, this man has scored 5 touchdowns in 5 weeks. He continues to be fantasy relevant. He continues to catch the ball so that your PPR scores keep going up. He's absolutely ridiculous. And you'll see with my rankings a little bit later, he's going to be unstoppable. And I really think if he plays this week, all things are pointing towards him playing, he's going to continue to have another great fantasy week. That is Cooper Kupp. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous stat-wise. So far this season, right? He only has 30 receptions, okay, which is 17 behind Adam Thielen and 16 behind Michael Thomas, the 2 other receivers that are the number 1 and the number 3 in half-point PPR scoring thus far this season. But the difference between the two is he just has the touchdowns, right? He has those 2 extra touchdowns comparatively to Adam Thielen and to Michael Thomas that just make him that much more fantasy relevant. It's unbelievable. I think nobody could have projected, Cooper Kupp being able to produce this many fantasy points this quickly, and in his second year only, right? Just to think about it, Cooper Kupp last season in his rookie year only had 5 touchdowns the entirety of the season. He's already matched that. Anything else is gravy, right? We're just going to reap the benefits of having drafted this guy late, and in PPRs, he's fantastic. That's Cooper Kupp. Now, Robert Woods, the main guy that I think is going to have, consistent production within this offense, and he's also going to be extremely fantasy relevant this week, especially if, the situation where Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks are both out somehow, which I don't see as a likely option, but it's a possibility. If both of them are out, there is a great opportunity for Robert Woods to become that number 1 wide receiver, have all of the targets. Yes, Josh Reynolds will also be the next man up within this offense, but Robert Woods, if Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks happen to be out this week, or just Brandon Cooks, right? Because I honestly think Cooper Kupp is going to play. If Brandon Cooks is the only one out, Robert Woods is going to step up into that nice wide receiver 1 position, he already gets a lot of targets and a lot of fantasy points on a weekly basis. I'm just going to read out his targets. Week 1, 9. Week 2, 9. Week 3, 11. Week 4, 5. And week 5, he had 7, right? Total, Robert Woods just continues to find himself in a situation where he's either going to be a red zone target, he's going to be that deep bomb target, or he'll find that in between. Usually Cooper Kupp dominates the short yardage routes, but thus far this season, 29 receptions on 41 targets, 415 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. The literal only difference between a Cooper Kupp and a Robert Woods as of right now is a couple touchdowns, right? I think if Robert Woods is put into that situation where there is no Brandon Cooks and there is no Cooper Kupp, he's going to thrive. He's going to be the number 1 option within this offense in the passing game. That is why he's one of my starts this week, and he's so damn consistent too. Now, the next guy I want to talk about on your screen, we have here Quincy Enunwa, a guy that many of you may be sleeping on. Now, I'm here to tell you, just don't completely sleep on this guy. This past week had 0 receptions on 5 targets for a big goose egg in fantasy, which is unfortunate, right? And his counterpart / cohort, Robbie Anderson, had 3 receptions, 2 touchdowns, 123 receiving yards, had a 20-point fantasy game, and looked fantastic, right? Got that offense moving. He got into the end zone. He was fantasy relevant, all things considered. I think going forward, Quincy Enunwa has already proven that he is Sam Darnold's go-to guy. He is the number 1 wide receiver on this team. Robbie Anderson can make those plays and have those big weeks, but he is not. He does not have the consistent floor on a week-to-week basis to trust, right? You can play Robbie Anderson into better matchups like this week, but I think specifically into a matchup like such against the Indianapolis Colts, where the Jets are going to have a pretty easy time scoring the ball and at least moving the ball, Quincy Enunwa is going to be the number 1 wide receiver. He has proven it this season with Sam Darnold under center with, what is that? The amount of targets is absolutely insane. Okay, in week 1, he had 10 targets, right? Which shocked many of us. Then he followed it with 11, 8, and this past week 5. Obviously, this past week against Denver, it dipped a little bit. That's what happens when you have Chris Harris Jr. shadowing you majority of the time. And the way I see it, yes, Enunwa had a dull game. There is a possibility that he is on the waiver wire, and somebody may have just said, I want Robbie Anderson instead. Give me that. There's a good chance. Let's say, for example, you're dealing with injury. Brandon Cooks, you're an owner of Marquise Goodwin. Something like Geronimo Allison, Randall Cobb, guys like that, right? That are dealing with injury that you are uncertain about. There is a better chance that you can go pick up at Quincy Enunwa, throw him in as a wide receiver 3 this week. And within my rankings, I'm not over-ranking him. I'm just thinking mindfully towards this game against the Indianapolis Colts, a team who's given up a bunch of fantasy points to the wide receiver position. Being the number 1 wide receiver for the Jets, I think Quincy Enunwa will have a good week. That is why he's one of my starts of the week. We're moving on. All right. The next 2 guys that I want to talk about, Emmanuel Sanders and Doug Baldwin. Specifically, Emmanuel Sanders, will begin with him. This past week, I spoke about Emmanuel Sanders. He wasn't looking great. And I said, specifically, he needs to get 10-plus targets. That's the kind of receiver he is. Case Keenum needs to deliver the ball to him, because for 3 weeks in a row, he was very, 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 dull, average. He had that one game where he had 4 receptions, sure, but he had that 30-yard rush for a touchdown, which saved his week. Then he followed it with games with like 5 receptions for 38 yards, 5 receptions for 40 yards, okay? That's not what you want out of Emmanuel Sanders, who's supposed to be a wide receiver 2 for your team. 5 to 6 points on a weekly basis isn't going to cut it. So, going forward, as of this last week, right, against the New York Jets, the offense and the game script was, pretty much towards, we have to pass the ball, we have to get back into the game. And that's where Emmanuel Sanders shines. This past week, he had 14 targets, 9 receptions for 72 yards. If you don't play in a fantasy scoring format of PPR, it may seem that his points are bad, right? 72 yards, he got you 7 points. You're like, that's not great, right? But in PPR and half-point PPR, that's fantastic. You want 14 targets because when you play against the Rams this week, and obviously the Rams are going to score, but they've been giving up a lot of points too, 30-plus points a week in the last 2 weeks to the Vikings and the Seattle Seahawks. I think Emmanuel Sanders is going to have a great week. I think he'll be able to find himself some fantasy relevance. You'll see by the rankings that I have him, but I like him as an absolute start this coming week. All right. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Andrew. Holy moly. We forgot about one guy. It's not hard to forget about him considering the performance he had this past week. Oh, man. 1 reception for 1 yard. Pete Carroll came out earlier this week and said, it was difficult, but we couldn't find a way to get him the ball within our game script. The run was working so well. Tyler Lockett was taking the top off the defense, blah, blah, blah. He got locked down, etc., etc. That's not what he's going to say, right? But he was basically inferring that the game script had gotten away from them. The run was such a consistent thing, consistently getting them yards, getting them points, that they decided, let's not try to force it to Doug Baldwin, which is the right thing to do in a football aspect when you're trying to win a game. But in the fantasy perspective, we're sitting over here like, what happened to Doug Baldwin? Thought he was going to be a top 10 receiver. Who else was Russell Wilson going to throw the ball to this year? Now I'm sitting on a bum that really just hasn't done anything all year because of his injury. And when he's come back, he's been absolutely useless, right? I think going forward this week in the London game against the good old Oakland Raiders, both teams are going to have to travel. They're going to be uncomfortable in these situations. And I think Doug Baldwin has a very good opportunity to have a good week. I'm telling you, do not pay mind or pay any attention to what he has done in the past this season, right? Let's just, fresh blank page, let's just completely forget about it. I know many people, such as I, we hold grudges against players for having bad specific weeks, like Derrick Henry or Kenyon Drake or Larry Fitzgerald, who I'll go over next. But specifically, I'm just here to tell you, Doug Baldwin should not be a guy you should be sitting this week. I think he will have fantasy production. There is no way that Russell Wilson does not feed Doug Baldwin the ball. That is impossible. That is against his nature. He's been doing it his entire career. He's going to continue to do so. And that's why I think Doug Baldwin is a start for this week. Especially, they're going against the Raiders defense that's been giving up a lot of points as of late. They gave up a lot against just about everyone this year. Okay? Even in the games that they've won, they've been competitive. They let Ryan Tannehill tear him up. Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield put up some points on the board, right? Phillip Rivers this past week. Everybody's been able to take advantage of that Raiders defense. My God, Gruden shouldn't have given away Khalil Mack, but I think Doug Baldwin anyway is going to have a great week. That's why he's one of my starts. Now let's get to the sits for this week, week 6 of the fantasy football season. We have here now Kenny Stills and Larry Fitzgerald, two guys that prior to the season I thought were going to be pretty decent players, right? We thought Kenny Stills was going to come in. He was going to be the flex for this offense. He was going to be that guy that they can move to the outside receiver spot, move him inside, play the slot where Jarvis was comfortable at, and be able to just riddle him with targets. He is a fast wide receiver that has the ability to catch the ball and make plays, right? That's what you want. You want athleticism, you want speed, you want decent route running, and you want the guy to at least have some good hands, right? Boom, there it is. Now, where has Kenny Stills been the last couple of weeks? My goodness, if someone has the answer to that, I'd love to hear it. Because honestly, I don't know. Week 1, Kenny Stills came out, fantastic, picked up 2 touchdowns. But the issue is, Kenny Stills continues to get a limited amount of targets. This last week, he was out-targeted by Albert Wilson. Who the heck is Albert Wilson, right? Obviously, I know who Albert Wilson is. But what I'm saying is, Kenny Stills, a guy who's been with the Dolphins for the last couple seasons, a guy who's comfortable with playing with Ryan Tannehill. Adam Gase knows his talent level. yet he is not being exclusively used within this offense. He is not, his abilities are not being taken advantage of. As of thus far, right? Kenny Stills, on a weekly basis, he's getting 5 targets. He's getting 2 to 3 receptions. That is not something that you want to start on your team on a weekly basis going forward, and especially this week against the Chicago Bears. That is why Kenny Stills is a sit this week. Do not touch him. He's a hazmat suit kind of player. Please do not touch Kenny Stills. Now, the last sit on this page, we have Larry Fitzgerald. Man, Larry Legend, I'm so sorry. It's unfortunate. I don't want to have to shit on you, Larry Legend, but you've been garbage, right? Maybe it's the fact that your quarterbacks haven't been great this year, but they really weren't great last season either. You had Carson Palmer for majority, maybe with like half of the season, and then you have Jude Stanton and Blaine Gabbert for the entirety of the end of the season, the last 8 games. And you were still, in fantasy, in full PPR, you were a top 5 wide receiver, right? You had 100+ receptions. Thus far this season, let's see these receptions. He's got 17 receptions so far. He's nowhere close. In 5 weeks, 17 receptions. I mean, this is not Larry Legend. This is a shell of the guy who's going to make the Hall of Fame. Everyone said he would eventually slow down. I don't see it as him slowing down. I just feel like this offense is not feeding him the ball enough, and I don't see it continuing this week against the Minnesota Vikings, where Xavier Rhodes is going to have the matchup against Larry Fitzgerald. And I don't think Larry Fitzgerald's going to be able to prosper in any way, whether they win the game or in fantasy. They're going to get smacked, and it's not going to look great for them. So that is why Larry Fitzgerald is a for sure sit this week. Now, the last 2 things I want to mention, right? I said there's 4 sits this week. Now, I don't have another page, but what I do have is a little bit of advice that I want to talk about. There are obvious teams that you want to avoid in fantasy, right? The Dallas Cowboys wide receivers, yeah, you don't want any of that. The Buffalo Bills wide receivers, yep, no, you don't want any of that. But you have to sometimes take risks on teams like, for example, this week, which I'll get into a little bit later. You want to take risks on teams that don't have great wide receivers, aka the Bears, right? As of right now, the Bears, yes, they just had that game where they threw for 6 touchdowns. They were fantastic. I still don't trust guys like Allen Robinson, Taylor Gabriel. These guys are very, very, very risky for this coming week. If you can, try to avoid them as much as you can, unless you have full, honest belief that they're going to be productive. Because I'm very scared of that kind of stuff, right? I'm also afraid of starting guys on the Colts, right? Who do you know on the Colts, right? T.Y. Hilton's out. Eric Ebron, he's a little banged up. Jack Doyle's out, right? They finally have Marlon Mack coming back. Congratulations. That's not going to do anything. But Chester Rogers, Corey Grant, right? We know these guys by name because they've been in the league for a little while. But can you trust them? Can you trust guys on the Washington Redskins? Because the way it is right now, the Washington Redskins receivers, they're not great. So I'm just saying, there are teams that we already know you shouldn't be taking wide receivers out of. Hopefully you know that by now. They're not great places for wide receivers to be successful. So going forward, just be careful with it. And anyway, let's get into the rankings, shall we? Okay, baby, here it is. We have ourselves our Week 6 wide receiver rankings. And we've got the top 18 in front of you as we speak, or as I speak. We have number 1, we have Antonio Brown, a guy who last week caught himself 2 touchdowns, was absolutely brought back into this offense, and was given the ample amount of targets that he needs. Antonio Brown is not a guy that should be getting 7 targets. No, that's not okay. He needs to consistently be getting his 15 targets a game. Why? Because he's one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the NFL. Adam Thielen will have something to say about that. But as of right now, Antonio Brown, he's a top-tier wide receiver. Obviously, he's going to start, right? Because majority of you, he was your first-round pick. But I'm just here to tell you, against the Cincinnati Bengals, I have no problem. There is nothing that's going to slow this man down. He was my number 2 wide receiver last week. He's bopped up to 1. All I can say, I don't know why I'm stuttering, but all I can say is just fire him up, get him out there. Number 2, we have Julio Jones. All right, Julio Jones. Oh, man. There's some weeks that he has 160 yards receiving. There's some weeks he has, 80 yards receiving with like 7 receptions. No big deal. As of right now, yet to find the end zone. He pretty much has a great week to do so this week. I mean, the Tampa Bay defense, the last time we saw them, was not good at anything. They literally could not stop anything. They couldn't stop themselves from making mistakes, much less. Especially offensively. I don't even know what the heck happened there. But as of right now, I think Julio Jones playing in the division against a very weak secondary, to say the least. He's going to have many opportunities to score. I think Matt Ryan and the Atlanta Falcons are going to be in a shootout against Jameis Winston and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's why I have Julio at number 2. Must start. Get him going. Adam Thielen, who I mentioned earlier, is the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy point perspective when it comes to half-point PPR scoring formats. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he also leads the league in receiving, with 589 receiving yards, 47 receptions. I mean, there's nobody even close to him right now. On a week-to-week basis, Adam Thielen is doing something that we haven't seen in a while. I'm just going to read the amount of points that he scores on a weekly basis. So in half-point PPR, week 1, 13.2. Then he follows it with a 25.1. Then a 17.5. Then a 23.5. Then a 21.1. Guys, he's had 100 yards receiving in every single game. He's had 3 touchdowns in 5 games. And his receptions are out of the roof. 10-plus receptions a week. I mean, because he's getting those 15 targets a week. Kirk Cousins, number 1 receiver. This coming week against the Cardinals, I don't see Adam Thielen as a risk. I understand Patrick Peterson's on that team. But just wait and see when Patrick Peterson lines up on Stefon Diggs. He's going to have to pick his poison. Because either way, he's going to have a tough time. Those Cardinals are going to have a tough time. As right now, Adam Thielen is my number 3 for this week. Number 4, Mike Evans. As I mentioned before, this game between the Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons, you have 2 offenses that are very capable at scoring the football, and you have 2 defenses that are not capable of stopping anybody ever, no matter how hard they try. Sometimes they do get a turnover here and there, but by all means, it's luck. Okay, Mike Evans is so far this season with Ryan Fitzpatrick has been great. Right before the season started, I had a couple videos talking about benefactors to suspensions. I even came out and publicly said Mike Evans with Ryan Fitzpatrick is sometimes even better because Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't care. He will throw the ball into double coverage to Mike Evans because he knows he'll go up and get it. Now, Jameis Winston's pretty much the same, just a little bit pulled back. He's a little bit reserved. He will throw the ball and check it down to Cameron Brate more often than he will risk it by throwing it to Evans. But majority of the interceptions that Jameis will throw are bad decisions throwing towards number 13, Mike Evans. This coming week against the Atlanta Falcons, I have no problem with starting him. He's coming off the bye week. He's looked great so far this season. He's going to look great going forward. Number 5, Davante Adams. Man, this past week, did he prove that he is the number 1 wide receiver for that Packers team? Davante Adams is the number 5 wide receiver in fantasy football this year, right? When it comes to half-point PPR scoring. I mean, he's been great, right? 4 touchdowns in 5 games. Another guy, this is where you get your points, right? If you can get in the end zone, you don't need as many receptions and you don't need as many yards. We all know that, but we know for a fact that eventually Jimmy Graham is going to start taking touchdowns. I don't know when that's going to be, but it's going to happen eventually. But for right now, against the 49ers on Monday Night Football, I like Davante Adams. Randall Cobb still injured, limited throughout the week. Geronimo Allison most likely going to play. And with the other receivers stepping up, whether it be Valdez-Scantling, Equanimeous St. Brown, there's going to be more threats within this offense. So it'll open up more opportunities for guys like Davante Adams to not have to get double covered every single time he goes down the field. Number 6, we have Odell Beckham Jr. going to play tomorrow night against the Philadelphia Eagles. This one was pretty tough for me. I was thinking to myself, Odell on these bigger, matchups, I would say, especially under the lights on TV. Man, the last time we saw Odell against the Carolina Panthers, he was fantastic. Can he repeat that kind of performance when Eli is going to be getting rushed nonstop all game long? I don't know. I think he is still a guy you have to start, but I'm just going to put it out there. There's a chance that you end up with, only 10 points at Odell, and there's a chance that he has himself another game and goes for 22. I don't know which one's going to show up this week, but either way, he has to start for your team because he's OBJ, and he's just too good to leave on your bench. Number 7, DeAndre Hopkins. He's going to be consistently good. The only difference between DeAndre Hopkins and the people above him, I just feel like Will Fuller and Kiki Cutie are going to continue to take these targets away from him, right? With number 1, corner draped on top of him, with the double coverage. That is the big deal, right? I don't care about the corners. If they're putting the safety over the top, it is going to be that much harder to find this man the ball. When you have such, speed on the edge with Will Fuller on the other side, and you have Cutie running over the middle, catching 5-yard slants here and there, I think there's going to be a potential that DeAndre Hopkins' numbers continuously decrease because of the production of the other wide receivers within this offense. That is why I have him at number 7. Either way, start him up. Let's go. Start him up. Number 8, Tyreek Hill. Last week against the Jacksonville Jaguars, had his opportunities. Obviously they're going to give him his shots down the field. But when you're double covered, it's not going to be easy. No one said it was going to be easy, but they had to give him his opportunities. You never know. Maybe he ends up burning somebody. Patrick Mahomes should have put a little bit of air underneath that ball, but it's okay. Tyreek Hill this coming week playing against the New England Patriots defense. He's going to have a pretty good week. I don't think anybody's objecting to that. Tyreek Hill, deadly speed. And he's honestly just a Swiss Army knife, this offense. They're using him out of the backfield a lot. He will find some points, whether it be through the run game, punt returns, or that deep ball that he's going to catch over the Patriots secondary. I like him at number 8. Number 9, A.J. Green playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is my history with A.J. Green and the Steelers. A.J. Green's very boomer bust, from what I remember against the Steelers, because honestly, they're going to try to force the ball away from A.J. Green, right? Just like any defense wants to do. But I think A.J. Green, he's got a pretty safe floor with Tyler Boyd stepping up in the last couple of weeks and Joe Mixon being so great out of the backfield. I think A.J. Green, he's still going to be productive. He's got a safe floor, especially because he continues to get those targets from Andy Dalton. Even when Andy Dalton's not playing great, it does not make a difference. A.J. Green finds himself catching the ball and getting into the end zone. This past week against Miami, on only 6 receptions, had 112 yards. He's been great, and he continues to get that 8 to 10 target range. I want that to increase, but obviously there are more mouths to feed within this offense as the season progresses and people begin to find their ways. But I like A.J. Green at number 9. Number 10, as I mentioned before, Cooper Kupp, the second best wide receiver in half-point PPR scoring, people. How is that even a thing? Honestly, how is that a thing? I don't know, but I'm glad I own him in majority of my leagues. He's been doing fantastic for me. Hopefully he plays this week. That is what it's probably leaning towards. So that's why I have him at number 10. Number 11, we have here Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen has been such a disappointment this year. Like, for almost the halfway mark, we're about to finish week 6, Keenan Allen hasn't done anything. Like, comparatively to last season, where he just came out and was consistently good, this season, what has he done, right? The last couple weeks, he's been a little banged up here and there, but he hasn't been fantastic. we're not seeing those games where he's dropping 20 points. We're getting those games where he just doesn't get a touchdown, right? 1 touchdown in 5 games this season. I understand he's been hurt a little bit. Mike Williams is part of the issue in that situation, and also Melvin Gordon taking a lot of the carries down at the goal line. I understand. It happens. But Keenan Allen hopefully can find his way going forward. But as of, thus far this season, hasn't been fantastic. This coming week, playing against, who are they playing against? The Cleveland Browns. It's looking towards Keenan Allen having a great game. Okay? Why? Because the Cleveland Browns, they're not a defense that is going to be completely pushed over, but they're not a defense that's going to completely shut you out either. I think Phillip Rivers in this Chargers offense is going to be able to do what they want when they kind of want it. Honestly, I really think the Chargers are just going to work this defense of the Cleveland Browns. I see Keenan Allen having a pretty good game and maybe having that resurgence to try to get him back into the conversation of being one of the top 10 wide receivers in the NFL, because that's where I've had him. Last season, he was a top 5 in PPR. What happened to him? I don't know. Hopefully he can find his way back. Number 12. We just talked about 11. Number 12, Stefon Diggs, a guy who, if Adam Thielen is on the other side of the field, continuing to produce, Stefon Diggs is going to find his way into the end zone. He's been just as good, right? And he gets just as many targets. Listen to these target counts, right? In week 1, no big deal. He had 6 targets. All right, good. Okay, no problem. Then he falls with 13, 10, 15, and 11. It's fantastic, right? You get a better quarterback. You upgrade from Case Keenum. You bring in Kirk Cousins. And then you just feed your top 2 weapons. You don't even need a run game. That's what they've proven. Without Dalvin Cook, what did they need? They don't need him. They've proven they don't even need a run game. Just feed each of these wide receivers 10 targets. They'll find their way. That's why I have him in number 12 this week. Good old Stefon Diggs. Number 13, Robert Woods. As I mentioned before, he's going to have a good week. Why? Because no matter what, in this Jared Goff-led offense, he is going to find his way into, fantasy relevance, whether it's because he gets 10 targets or because he gets, 70 receiving yards plus, or if he, breaks through, gets that touchdown. This coming week, I don't think Brandon Cook is likely to play, and that is going to increase the value of Robert Woods. That's why I have him at 13. He's a little bit behind Cooper Kupp because, honestly, Cooper Kupp just continues and consistently is getting that production. He's getting that opportunity down, especially in the red zone. Other than Todd Gurley getting the ball first, the next guy to get the ball in the red zone, it's Cooper Kupp. All right. But anyway, Robert Woods, he's my number 13. Number 14, my next start of the week, the third one that I mentioned, Emmanuel Sanders. He's going to have a good week against the Rams, who literally haven't been able to stop anybody for a while. And I think it's going to continue. I know Case Keenum is not fantastic, but I think if he continues to feed Emmanuel Sanders, stop throwing the ball towards Courtland Sutton. I understand he's a great wide receiver, up and coming. Eventually will take Demaryius Thomas's job. But as of right now, Emmanuel Sanders needs to be the number 1 target. He needs to be the number 1 option within this offense. I understand that they want to run the ball with Lindsey and Royce Freeman, but Emmanuel Sanders is going to find himself with 10, hopefully 15 targets this coming week, and hopefully has himself a good game. He's my number 14. Number 15, we have Juju Smith-Schuster against the Cincinnati Bengals. It's hard to put Antonio Brown at number 1 and not say Juju Smith is going to have himself a good week either, because he continues to do it. He's just like Antonio Brown in the fact that they continue to get a bunch of targets and they're continuing to be used at an accelerated rate. I just think, eventually Juju Smith's targets are going to go down. Why? As soon as the Steelers begin to run the ball more and more, it's going to go down. That's what happened last season. When Le'Veon Bell was within this offense, Juju Smith wasn't the second option, right? Le'Veon Bell was. This past week against the Atlanta Falcons, it was Antonio Brown and it was James Conner, right? Juju Smith took a backseat to the opportunities that James Conner got. I think as the season progresses, that is probably going to be a mainstay of where Juju's more of the third option within this offense, and his fantasy value might decrease as we continue. But as of right now, this coming week, I like him at my number 15. I don't think the Cincinnati Bengals, bring as much of a threat as many other defenses could possibly do. So he's my number 15. Number 16, John Brown. My goodness. All right, he was my start of the week last week. Didn't play fantastic, but you know what stat that I really want to point out? Dude had 14 targets last week, okay? The Ravens, they couldn't move the ball, right? They could barely score 6 points, right? And yet, okay, they scored 9 points, and yet they were still able to have John Brown with 14 targets. Imagine if he catches, I think he had 7 catches last week. Imagine if he catches 4 more. Boom. Okay. He's going to continue to get the ball. They're playing against the Titans this week. I'm not worried about no Adoree Jackson or what's that other corner? Oh my goodness, Andrew. Malcolm Butler. I'm not worried about that. John Brown is going to continue to get his targets. He's going to continue to be fantastic. That's why he's my number 16. Number 17 we have here, Jarvis Landry against the Chargers. Listen, I think that the Chargers matchup is a good one for them, right? They just got to feed Jarvis Landry the ball more. He needs to see more targets consistently. Otherwise, why do we have Jarvis Landry out here? I understand he's had 10-plus targets in many of his games. The rest is on him. He needs to show up, and he needs to catch the ball. These last 3 weeks, he's had 14, 10, and 10 on the reception call. In the target column, right? And he's followed it with only, 17 receptions, 34 targets, 34 targets, 17 receptions. He's only catching 50% of the passes thrown his way. Now, is that a thing where Baker Mayfield's not putting it on him? There's a possibility that's the case, right? I haven't seen every single ball that's been thrown to Jarvis Landry, but I think he's way too talented a receiver to be, putting up mediocre numbers. As we get into the better matchups, this being one of them against the Chargers, I think Jarvis Landry can have a really great week. That is why he's my number 17 this coming week. We have Alshon Jeffery at number 18. This one was a tricky one, but I thought to myself, Alshon Jeffery, he's going to get those 8 targets to 10 targets a week. That is for sure. He's going to catch probably, 60% of the passes thrown his way. That's usually how that's his MO, okay? And the rest of it is all touchdown upside. This coming week, Thursday Night Football against the Giants, they're going to have to move the ball. They're going to have to feed their Ertz. They're going to have to run the ball with Smallwood and Clement, throw it out of the backfield. But other than that, I don't worry about Nelson Aguilar. I really think Alshon Jeffery is going to be a pretty solid wide receiver 2 rest of season because Carson Wentz needs someone to throw the ball to. This past week, Alshon Jeffery was practically invisible. Had 8 targets but only 2 receptions, which is terrible, right? The week prior was able to get his 10 targets with 8 receptions. As the season progresses, Alshon will continue to get better. He is a red zone threat going forward, and I think until they have that complete RB1, they're going to have to throw the ball more and more as the season goes on. So Alshon Jeffery's number 18. All right, let's finish with the back half of my rankings. We have number 19, Tyler Boyd. Now, what's my thought process behind Tyler Boyd? He didn't have a great, all things considered, he wasn't fantastic this last week, but he's been really good this season. He's been sneaky good, right? Let me just read you some stats, right? This last week only had 4 receptions for 44 yards, but the week prior, 11 receptions, 100 yards, 6 receptions, 132 yards, 6 receptions, 91 yards. Listen, this guy's going to get about 8 to 10 targets a week, and he's going to be fantasy relevant with the upside of a touchdown this coming week against the Steelers defense that I don't think is completely, fixed this issue. It's has completely fixed all of its issues. I think Tyler Boyd and AJ Green are going to have good enough weeks to be able to, exploit them. Not to the point where the Cincinnati Bengals are winning this game, but to the point where these two are being fantasy monsters, at least, with their receptions, their targets, and their yards. And the upside of a touchdown here and there. My number 20, we have Doug Baldwin, my last start of the week. I think Doug Baldwin is going to be good this week. There is a possibility that he ends up continuing to be trash. And if that happens, we have to go to DEFCON 5. We have to begin to sound the sirens, and we have to start worrying. But until then, he's my number 20 this week. I think with Russell Wilson in London against a very mediocre defense, if not a very bad defense of the Oakland Raiders, I think Doug Baldwin will find himself a pretty good game and some fantasy points for your team. Number 21, Julian Edelman against the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm predicting this game to be a shootout, right? Julian Edelman, I think, is going to have himself his floor of receptions, whether it be those 6 receptions, 60 yards, but I think there's a potential for more. I think if teams continue to score through the air, the clock isn't going to move, right? So what's going to happen is this game is going to take way longer. They're going to keep going back and forth. I think Edelman, being one of the, obviously James White looks like the number 1 target so far, but being one of the favorites, whether it be White, Gronk, and him, Julian Edelman, he's going to see himself a lot of targets. I see 10 targets in his future and probably 6, 7, 8 catches. Hopefully that touchdown upside. That's what we're looking for with guys like this, with such good floors. We want that upside. And that's what Cooper Kupp's been able to do. He's kind of the same guy, right? He's the favorite target for the quarterback. They play inside a little bit of slot. Boom. They end up finding the end zone and playing that much better and being that much more relevant in fantasy. Number 22. Okay, people, I understand. Don't chop my head off. Amari Cooper is on a every other week kind of basis. Now, what does that mean? Every other week he's good. Okay? Now, this coming week, it's his week, right? It's time. Week 1, Amari Cooper, 2 fantasy points. Week 2, 16. Week 3, 2 fantasy points. Week 4, 20 fantasy points. And week 5, he had 1.5 fantasy points. So what does that mean for week 6? It means, sound the alarms, Amari Cooper is going to have a 15-point week plus. I'm calling it. You don't have to agree with this, right? These are subjective rankings. These are not how it's going to break down. But I honestly think that with this trend that I'm looking at right now, it may not seem like it's supported by much evidence, but Amari Cooper is an every other week guy. I think against the Seattle Seahawks, he has a pretty good opportunity. I don't think this secondary is, completely the best thing that they're going to throw at him so far this season. He's played against better corners thus far and done better, right? He played against Denver earlier this season, had one of his best games, 10 receptions on 10 targets and 116 yards. I think Amari Cooper, he's going to find himself a good game. We're all going to be surprised, and then we're all going to get excited. But then the following week, he's going to be on a bye week, and week 8, we're going to be wondering, do we start him or sit him? We'll get to that when we get there. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But as of right now, don't be surprised if Amari Cooper has himself a week. Number 23, Sammy Watkins, another guy within this Chiefs-Patriots game that I think is going to have a good game. Sammy Watkins, as of late, he's been decent, right? He's a wide receiver that has a base floor of 5 receptions, 50 yards. But I think because of the matchup, because of the opportunity, he is going to have the upside of that touchdown. I have him at number 23, which may seem to be a little high, honestly, in my opinion, it's a high ranking for Sammy Watkins. But I think he's going to have that kind of a week. So don't be surprised if he does or if he doesn't. But I have him at 23. Number 24, Corey Davis against the Ravens this past week was mediocre to say the best. But the thing is, he is going to continue to be that number 1 wide receiver for this Tennessee Titans team. They just got to find themselves. They've got to find themselves a rhythm. Mariota has to improve, and Corey Davis is the guy he's going to throw the ball to. Number 25, my last start of the week, Quincy Enunwa. I really think that Quincy Enunwa has a great opportunity. I understand many of you may be believing that Robbie Anderson is the next coming, but that's not the case. I think Enunwa's targets that I mentioned earlier will prove to you that he is the guy that's going to get majority of the production and opportunity against the Colts this week. Number 26, Devin Funchess. Here's the thing about Devin Funchess. He's not a bad wide receiver at all, right? Last season, he was pretty good. He's a wide receiver, too, by the end of the year. He looked really good last season. This year has looked good in glimpses, but this Panthers offense, they have no bias, right? Cam Newton does not care who he gives the ball to, right? If you're open, he's going to feed you. There is no number 1 wide receiver here, right? It may be Devin Funchess that gets majority of the offensive snap counts, but as of right now, Devin Funchess doesn't look to be a guy that you can consistently trust on a week-to-week basis. This coming week, he's got a pretty good matchup. We saw what the Saints were able to do in the passing game versus the Redskins. He's got a good opportunity, but is he going to be able to act upon it? I don't know. That's why I've got him about 26, somewhere where he's at that wide receiver 3 fringe, right? He's an upside of a touchdown, so he's a higher end wide receiver 3. That's why I've got him at 26. Number 27, Will Fuller. As I was mentioning before with DeAndre Hopkins, I think as the season progresses, these other receivers within the Texans team are going to get more and more production and more opportunity because they have to respect DeAndre Hopkins' talent. They're going to put 2 guys on him. Otherwise, they're going to feel the pain. I think Will Fuller and Kiki Cutie, they're good wide receiver 3 options on the matchup for this week. Number 28, Mohamed Sanu, has had 3 great back-to-back games. That is why I currently have him over Calvin Ridley, a guy who had, 5 touchdowns in 2 weeks? It's unsustainable kind of production. We knew that coming into last week, but I still had him as one of my starts of the week. Had Mohamed Sanu as one of my hidden gems. It's fine. I think going forward, especially in this matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, all of the wide receivers, all of the Atlanta Falcons have a good opportunity, but Mohamed Sanu continues to get a high amount of snaps with the offensive percentage, and he continues to find himself getting those targets that Ridley and Julio Jones are not getting. So Mohamed Sanu, he's my number 28. Number 29, we have Demaryius Thomas. This past week has had one of his most relevant fantasy weeks, but it was all in garbage time. I still think he could be productive this week. We know how bad the Rams defense has been as of late. I think there is a pretty good chance that Demaryius Thomas ends up having a pretty decent week. I'm not saying he's going to blow down the gates and we're going to have old Demaryius Thomas back. That is probably not what's going to happen, and most likely will not happen that way. But they're going to be at home. The Denver Broncos will be comfortable in Mile High City. I think Demaryius Thomas is going to have himself a good week to the point where you can start him as a wide receiver 3. Number 30, I mentioned Taylor Gabriel before, a guy I don't really trust, but there's going to have to be one wide receiver within this offense that scores, right? You can't just feed the ball to Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen the entire season, right? You've got to find a rapport with one receiver. The last time we saw the Bears play, Taylor Gabriel, 10-plus targets, a bunch of receptions. I'm sorry, was it 10-plus targets? I'm quite curious on the target count of Taylor Gabriel. Here we are. Taylor Gabriel as of late, okay? The last time we saw him, 7 targets, 7 receptions, right? The week prior to that, 10 targets, 6 receptions, 7 targets, 4 receptions, 5 targets, 5 receptions. So he's obviously been getting production throughout the entire season. The question is, has he built enough of a rapport with Mitchell Trubisky to become a relevant fantasy wide receiver? He's good in the NFL. We know that. We saw him on that almost Super Bowl winning Falcons team a couple years ago where he was a really good slot receiver / fantasy play on specific weeks, right? But as of right now, Taylor Gabriel, he will sit at number 30 and hopefully will find some rapport. Otherwise, it's going to be Allen Robinson? I can't put my head around trusting Allen Robinson. I just can't do it. We're moving on. Number 31, Keelan Cole. Now, Blake Bortles threw for 400 yards last week, right? He's going to throw for a bunch again this week. Whether he turns over the ball, that's irrelevant. But I think the wide receivers like Dante Moncrief, Keelan Cole, Dede Westbrook, the tight ends that stepped up this past week, Niles Paul and O'Shaughnessy with Austin Seferian-Jenkins going down, Yeldon out of the backfield. They just acquired Jamal Charles. I think there is a pretty good amount of talent when it comes to, the wide receiver position on this Jacksonville Jaguars team. I think this week, Keelan Cole, it's your week. Step it up, buddy, and get out there. Otherwise, Dede Westbrook, Moncrief has not been bad either. These guys keep getting great amount of yards and good amount of receptions. In PPR, they could be good flex plays if you are running thin because of bye weeks or injuries. Number 32, Chester Rodgers. The last 2 weeks, he's had 11 targets each and 8 receptions each for 80-plus receiving yards. T.Y. Hilton is going to be out this week. Jack Doyle is going to be out this week. Eric Ebron, a little banged up. He will probably play, though. Chester Rodgers is going to be the number one wide receiver for this team. He has that base floor of 10-plus targets and 8 receptions. He's just got the upside of a touchdown. As of right now, I don't think that's going to happen, but there's a possibility. If he ends up doing it, that's fantastic. Otherwise, he's a wide receiver 3 this coming week. Number 33, Calvin Ridley, a guy who has the potential, but he's got to find the end zone. If he doesn't find the end zone, how much production he's going to, considerably get compared to Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, and Tevin Coleman within this offense, right? As of right now, he's got to get those touchdowns. Otherwise, we got to see a big yardage play, which will probably lead to a touchdown, right? So as of right now, I'm going to be safe with him. I'm going to put him at 33. Number 34, Michael Crabtree. Had a boost in targets this past week, but just he couldn't get the ball in his hands. He keeps dropping the ball. Or Joe Flacco just doesn't put it on him. It's okay. It's going to eventually get there. These are new teammates. They're going to find their rhythm. They will find the rapport together. Michael Crabtree will eventually get there. He's not to the point where John Brown is, but he'll get there. He's my number 34. Number 35, Tyler Lockett. Can't ignore him. He's the deep threat. In this game against the Raiders, he's going to have his opportunities. If he ends up breaking that one, it's automatic 13 fantasy points. You're welcome, right? Number 36, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the other wide receivers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yesterday in my running backs video, I put my last running back as good old Ronald Jones because I want to talk about these Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I haven't really specifically spoken about any Tampa Bay Buccaneers thus far this season because I've just been losing my mind trying to comprehend why Ryan Fitzpatrick scored so many points consistently, right? So DeSean Jackson, Chris Godwin, they both have the upside of playing way better, right? They could be ranked above Corey Davis, potentially, right? But as of right now, I'm thinking, okay, who is going to get, besides Mike Evans and Cameron Brate, who we know are the number 1 and 2 in Jameis Winston's eyes, who is the next guy to step up? I don't know whether it's going to be DeSean Jackson or Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin has had, 3 touchdowns in his first 4 games this season. DeSean Jackson is somewhere similar to that. Let me find these stats. DeSean Jackson's been pretty insane. He's kind of found the fountain of youth as of late, especially with Fitzpatrick. He's had 3 touchdowns in 4 games, right? They're even in that sense. They continue to have really good games. Thus far this season, DeSean Jackson's had 300-yard receiving games against this really good matchup. These two could potentially be breakout players. They could honestly be top 24 wide receivers. You could literally see Evans, Godwin, and DeSean Jackson all with touchdowns this week in 80-plus yards respectively. Just wanted to take my time out to say that. And I honestly think if you have these guys, you should absolutely play them. You should absolutely play. They have so much upside because of the matchup and with Jameis coming back. Jameis is one of those guys. Like I mentioned before, Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't care. He'll throw the ball. He'll throw a pick. Jameis is kind of in the same boat. He doesn't give a shit, right? He'll throw the pick, let it go for 6. Offense, get back out here. Let's go. Just saying. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. If you haven't already, please go down, click the subscribe button. And if you have any questions, please go down to the comment section and ask away. I will try to get your questions, but I'm looking down the barrel of a lot, and it's coming down to the point where it's either, Andrew, do you want to go to sleep? Or, Andrew, do you want to answer questions on YouTube until, 3 in the morning? And I've been choosing to sleep as of late, but we'll get to the questions, hopefully, before Sunday. Those Thursday questions, they're going to be tougher to answer because there's so many that I have to get through. But hopefully others will answer the questions in the comment section to help you out. Otherwise, thank you everybody for watching. And until next time, tight ends, I'll see you guys.